It's okay. It was okay. Sí.
Bueno, dou a benvida de presentación do reitor da Universidade da Coruña a todas as persoas asistentes a este acto. Welcome, Mr. Chipperfield. Esta Escola de Arquitectura, única do Sistema Público Universitario de Galicia, é quen da formación das arquitectas e arquitectos que traballarán nesta axenda territorial que agora temos a honra de acoller en este evento. Esta escola que, desde fan tempo, forma parte do proceso de aportación do seu coñecemento sobre o desenvolvemento sustentable no noso país. E non pode ser allea esta axenda. Parabéns á Dirección Xeral de Ordenación do Territorio e Urbanismo da Xunta de Galicia, moitas gracias, Cara, e a Fundación RIA que o lidera. Paso a palabra ao director desta escola, don Plácido Lizanco.
Gracias, Amparo. Ben, quero vos dar a máis cordial benvida á Escola Técnica Superior de Arquitectura da Universidade de Coruña, o que é o mesmo que decir que a Escola de Arquitectura de Galicia. E non esquezo decir que moita xente de Asturias, León e Zamora e de outras partes do Estado tamén nos considera a súa escola, porque efectivamente somoslo, non? E digo máis, somos unha institución global, e xa que logo concernida ca construcción do mundo, que é unha cousa que facemos desde hai 50 anos. Moitas gracias a todas e todos. Realmente estou emocionado pola cantidad de xente que estades aquí, tanto na platea, como entre as persoas invitadas, como encima da mesa. Vou iniciar os agradecementos pola vicerrectora, Amparo Casares, en delegación do reitor, que expresamente me explicou que hoxe viña Amparo no seu lugar porque está nunha reunión que non podía mover. A Encarna Rivas, directora xeral de Ordenación do Territorio e Urbanismo da Xunta de Galicia, Elena Ampudia, decana do Colexio de Arquitectos, e ambas as dúas, e quero decirlo, saltando o meu protocolo, exalumnas desta escola, e iso me custa moito decirlo. Tamén está no público Susana Lenguas, que é presidenta de Portos de Galicia, e por parte da Fundación RIA, pois eu diría que prácticamente toda a fundación en plena, encabezada polo seu presidente, David Chipperfield. You are welcome. Thank you very much for coming. Carlos Seoane, Evelyn Stern, Manuel Rodríguez, que está na mesa, vicepresidente e director respectivamente da Fundación, e un largo número de persoas da Fundación RIA que por motivos obvios non podo enumerar aquí. Tamén están as persoas do Comité Experto que veu traballando na axenda territorial de Galicia. Moitos os vexo xa por aquí. Permitídeme, compañeiras e compañeiros, que non vos enumere un a un. E, bueno, teño que decir que tamén están aquí outras persoas da UTC, como a directora da Escola de Enxeñería de Camiños, a coordinadora do grado en Paisaxe, Cristina García Fontán, Sonia Puente Landarzozu, directora general de Ordenación del Territorio do Goberno do Principado de Asturias, ademais dun amplísimo número de compañeiras e compañeiros da escola, da UTC e do mundo profesional. O tempo que dispoñemos é moi breve, cada un dos intervintes neste evento tan complexo. Estou seguro que ningún, nin siquiera eu, estamos aquí para oírme a min. Así que remato coa brevedade que se nos pide, indicando que o que hoxe vamos a escoitar aquí é moi importante para esta escola. Por eso agradecemos que suceda aquí e que nos acompañedes neste momento. Pásolle a palabra a Elena Ampudia, decana do colexio, que posteriormente ya pasará a Encarna Rivas. Esta era a escaleta que eu tiña marcado. Non sei se protocolariamente é así. Vos me corrixiredes.
Todos sabemos de la complejidad de la profesión de arquitecto, profesión que puede ser ejercida desde muy distintos ámbitos, pero en cualquiera de ellos debemos ser conscientes de la influencia de nuestro trabajo en la sociedad. La arquitectura y el urbanismo ejercen una influencia directa en la vida de las personas y ayudan a mejorarla. De ahí que el trabajo que hagamos deba ser cuidadoso y siempre con el objetivo de mejorar la calidad de vida de las personas. Desde siempre somos conocedores de esta cuestión dentro de la profesión, pero es en los últimos años cuando el mensaje ha llegado a la sociedad a través de distintas iniciativas. El proyecto Terra, actividad divulgativa y educacional creada en su día por José Manuel Rosales, Pedro de Llano, Juan Luis Dalda y Antonio Díaz, que con el apoyo del Colegio Oficial de Arquitectos de Galicia y de la Xunta de Galicia, a través de la Consellería de Medio Ambiente, Territorio y Vivienda, lleva más de 20 años formando a los escolares gallegos con el objetivo de que tengan un mejor conocimiento crítico y propositivo sobre los espacios que habitamos y administrarlos con responsabilidad. Este proyecto está hoy coordinado por Arquitectos Sin Fronteiras, que sigue fielmente estos principios y además proponen nuevas actividades. Otras iniciativas desarrolladas por arquitectos son A Vila do Mañá, de Sandra González Álvarez, el Manual de Construcción para Mini-Arquitectos de Nuria Prieto González, los talleres de neuroarquitectura del sistema Lupo, de Fermín Blanco, entre otras. Todas ellas han contribuido directamente a la difusión y puesta en valor de la arquitectura y el urbanismo. Desde la pandemia, este interés por el espacio que habitamos ha crecido exponencialmente. Lo hemos comprobado en la última edición de los premios Goya, con el premio al mejor cortometraje, Arquitectura Emocional 1959, donde se incide en lo importante que son los lugares que habitamos, que vivimos, por los que transitamos. Esos edificios, el paisaje construido, que sin saberlo marcan nuestras emociones. Para su director, el corto es un pequeño grano de arena para divulgar el patrimonio y el impacto emocional que tiene la arquitectura sobre nosotros. La recién aprobada Ley de Arquitectura eleva nuestra disciplina a la categoría de bien de interés general. Es por ello que las instituciones y la Administración tenemos la obligación de trabajar de manera coordinada, aprovechando al máximo la labor que cada uno de nosotros realizamos. La colaboración y optimización de recursos es la vía para obtener el mejor resultado en beneficio de la sociedad. Espero que cumplamos con nuestro deber y así hacer entre todos una Galicia mejor. Nada más.
Yo hoy aquí no soy la directora xeral de la Consellería de Medio Ambiente. Yo vuelvo a ser la que aún niña pisó por primera vez la Escuela de Arquitectura el pasado, hace 30 años. Y en un camino sin sospechar ni siquiera remotamente que estaba caminando hacia un urbanismo responsable. No sé cuánto de aquella niña queda aún ahora en mí. Estoy aquí para contradecir lo que demasiado a menudo muestra la experiencia sobre lo poco que solemos aprender. Nobleza obliga, vengo como alumna para agradecer a los profesores de esta escuela que pusieron viento en mis velas para poder llegar hasta donde hoy estoy. Gracias, profesor Gallego Jorreto, gracias, profesora Golubov, gracias, profesor Casabella, gracias, profesor Franco Taboada. Profesores, muchas gracias a todos. Con las ganas de aprender intactas, continúo siendo hoy alumna de una formación permanente, tratando de aprender de los mejores. Celebro en particular el privilegio de que hoy en mi escuela acojamos la sabiduría del profesor Chipperfield. También que esta escuela siga formando alumnos con la capacidad de colaboración, la flexibilidad, la imaginación y la innovación necesarias para enrolarse en el trabajo laboral, en un contexto en que convivan en armonía la tecnología y las humanidades, que les proporcionen esa capacidad de discernimiento, ese pensamiento crítico imprescindible para desenvolverse adecuadamente en lo profesional y, sobre todo, en la vida. Bueno, si he de decir la verdad, también vengo un poco como directora xeral de Ordenación del Territorio y Urbanismo, aunque sienta a menudo y hoy en particular que estoy en un lugar en el que la vida me ha colocado sin que yo haya participado apenas en esa elección, esa vida que inesperadamente me ha llevado a trabajar para las diversas administraciones. Dicen que el servicio público es una vocación noble, sin duda lo es. Y con ese afán trabajamos día a día en la Xunta de Galicia. Somos conscientes de la responsabilidad que implica el compromiso con la sociedad e intentamos ganar autoridades del ejemplo, pensando que algo hecho es mejor que algo perfecto y que el interés general no puede acabar subordinado a las pequeñas particularidades y localismos competenciales, territoriales o sectoriales. Con esa filosofía pedimos la implicación de esta escuela, de todos vosotros, arquitectos, profesores, alumnos, en la definición de nuestro escenario de vida, en la elaboración de una axenda territorial de Galicia que guíe nuestro caminar. El futuro está abierto, pero no puede improvisarse. Todos somos responsables de lo que ese futuro va a depararnos. Proyectar el futuro no es solo predecirlo, sino también preestablecerlo. Todos los días, todos nosotros hacemos política con nuestros actos. Cómo nos movemos, cómo nos alimentamos, cuánta energía consumimos. Basta con que cada uno de nosotros tome conciencia de ello y cumpla simplemente su deber. Si no pensamos en nuestro porvenir, no lo tendremos. Al fin y al cabo, el mundo no es más que tal como nosotros lo hacemos. Ya lo dijo Don Quijote a Sancho: cambiar el mundo no es locura ni utopía, es justicia. Más nada, moitas gracias.
David Chipperfield, un dos profesionais máis prestixiosos do mundo neste momento. O seu currículum vitae necesitaría unha sesión monográfica para ser sintetizado, pero eso non o vamos facer aquí hoxe. Quero apurar o seu currículum dicindo que Chipperfield ten a cualidade excepcional de ter alcanzado o maior recoñecemento internacional e que isto o fixo a partir dun exercicio da profesión alonxado das banalidades formales que tristemente apreciamos en tantas arquitecturas internacionais. David Chipperfield é ademais un profesional polifacético que non só construíu, tamén escribiu, organizou exposicións e fundou a Fundación RIA en Galicia, da que logo o seu presidente Manuel Rodríguez, tamén presente na mesa, nos dará máis detalles. Today, 38 years later, after opening his office in London, we can say that Chipperfield maintains since that very beginning a dual vocation. As a professional of great prestige, he has run a highly developed practice. And as an intellectual, he has been continually committed with the people and also with the place and the time in which he lives. For all these reasons, we are proud to welcome David Chipperfield today to our school. David, welcome to ETSAC. Please feel at home. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this invitation. I'm not an intellectual. But I do believe there's more to architecture than architecture. I believe that architecture serves something more than itself. And therefore, I'm interested in critical practice. I'm interested in practice that questions itself. And my talk is based on this. It's based on a question about what is the role of architecture? What is the role of the architect? And this is a question which we have always got to ask, but I would say now we are at a moment when this question is more important than ever. I preface my talk with two assumptions, which I believe are fundamental. The first assumption is that since this school opened 50 years ago, the role of the architect has been substantially eroded, that the position the profession held within society has over these 50 years been reduced. One from a position where we had much more societal responsibility to one where we have, in many cases, become commercial service. This is my first assumption. My second premise and place of departure in a way is that climate change forces us, not only as normal human beings, but within our profession, to substantially readdress the way we work, to consider ideas not only of mitigation, not only of being more considerate about which materials we use, but a more profound reconsideration of how we build, what we build, where we build, why we build, and who do we build for. The twin global crisis of climate change and social inequality creates enormous challenges for us. But at the same time, I believe it gives us an opportunity to refocus our skills and priorities. I'm really talking to the students in this room, because us older generation, we have practiced in a certain way. The challenge for us is to try to help you not copy our generation. We are dinosaurs. Architectural practice will change. You cannot imitate where we have been. And our responsibility is to point this out. Architectural practice to your generations will be totally different. I don't believe there's any doubt. Where there is doubt is how do we get from where we are to where we need to be? How do we transfer from a position that has been defined for us to one where we might create new ways of practice and being more purposeful in the issues that confront us? Help. How do I start this?
Yeah.
Oh. I began my architectural studies in the early 80s. Well, I began slightly early, but I completed in the early 80s. And at this time, I would say the profession still believed that it had a profound role in society. We still believed, my teachers especially, believed in the fact that architects and planners were building a new world. By the time we got to the 80s, this optimism was slightly checked, was slightly questioned. There were a lot of failures, and planning itself was being questioned. I'm talking very much from a British or an English perspective, and I know some of these chronologies are different in Spain than they were in the UK. In the case of dismantling societal priorities, we led the world. Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s reduced the idea of the state and promoted the importance of the free market. So in the 80s, we had the coincidence of a sort of intellectual collapse of modernism and the appearance of the free market as a new force. this began certainly in the Anglo-Saxon world, the change of the profession from a profession that was building hospitals, building housing, building schools, building society, to one of a service, and a service to this new energy of liberated investment and free market. 40 years later, this is the result. My beautiful city, destroyed by free market opportunism. We were told that this would bring us wealth, prosperity, security. It hasn't. It's just messed up our towns. So we now have to think in another way. This logic, this idea that free market investment solves everything. The difficulty is, how do we put the genie back into the box? How do we reimpose, in a way, planning and order and ideas? From my own perspective, I began architecture in modest practice. And I want to, in a way, rebalance my talk in a way, because I don't want the impression that architecture isn't important. It is totally important. And as architects, the questions that we have to confront from our own perspective, from our own profession. We are not environmentalists or sociologists or anthropologists. We are architects. And I fundamentally believe in the importance of substance, of material, of space, of light, all the things which architecture can do, the stuff of architecture. But architecture is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. We have to learn our craft. We have to be in control of the elements of our craft, how we make buildings, how we imbue them with qualities, physical qualities, experiential qualities. But in the end, also projects which engage with society. I don't think we're trained enough at schools of architecture to consider the real importance of our audience. And who do I mean by our audience? I mean the people we make buildings for. Who do we make buildings for? Well, we make buildings primarily for the people that pay us to make the buildings. So we could say our client is the one that employs us. But that's too simple, because actually our client is also the people who work in the building or who visit the building. You could even say the client is also the person that drives past in their car every morning and never goes in the building. These are our invisible clients. This is our invisible contract. I think we're not trained enough to think about that. And therefore, and I show, this is the very first building I built in England. It was in a very sensitive place, a small town, Henley. It's very super conservative. The people hated modern architecture, hated anything modern. And therefore, the design of the building, I had to consider at that time how to make a building that would be acceptable. Because if we think about the audience, we can imagine that they're not important. That as architects, we are professionals, and we have the right to do what we think is important. But actually, it should be shaped by this dialogue between us and society. We have to find this relationship. And I hover on this project a little bit compared to other ones because it was a project that taught me most about this idea of a building, as it were, offering something. It strangely was completely accepted by the community against every warning. The planners were very difficult. Prince Charles at this was the one that was campaigning against modern architecture. Modern architecture had a very bad reputation. So the building used timber, it had familiar form using a pitch roof, things which are not so strange now, but were certainly not part of modern architecture at that time. It surprised me how important it was for me as an architect that not only did we build something that was, as it were, intellectually accepted, but it was also emotionally and societally accepted. The practice, my practice has, over the last however many years, worked increasingly in historical and, why doesn't it work? In sensitive locations. We probably have gravitated towards these projects, but I think that we've been, we have been concerned to try to do projects where there is the potential of public engagement. This is a cemetery, public cemetery in Venice. And of course, some of these projects are quite formalistic, others are less. But I would say that we have learned in our practice the idea of integrating our projects and considering the context, not just the physical context, but the social and emotional context. We don't really have any right to impose our buildings. We need to earn that right. I've always most of my work has always been outside of my own city and outside of my own country. And in a way, I think it's made me more sensitive to this idea of having no entitlement. You have no entitlement to build a building in Japan. I'm not Japanese. I don't know anything about Japan. I have no entitlement to build a large building in the middle of the most important street in Innsbruck. Therefore, if I do it, I should try to be careful that my lack of entitlement doesn't become a fundamental critique, that one respects this, as it were, privilege or honor to do something. Our projects pulled me to Berlin, and Berlin became a very important part of how we developed our attitude to architecture. Berlin was, after the reunification of the city, the task of the city was to find itself again. Berlin is a very artificial city from its very history. It was strategically positioned. It had no mineral wealth. It had no great geographical reason to be there. It was military more than anything. Berlin has always been inventing itself. With the separation of the city, the city was artificially maintained politically by the West and, of course, politically by the East. With the reunification, there was an enormous amount of work to rethink these questions again. In the east side of the city, there were a lot of derelict buildings. And we did a lot of projects where we built in the unfinished project of Berlin, these ruined buildings, empty courtyards, and to find a way of integrating a modern architecture within a historical context, not out of a sort of formalistic parody, but in terms of trying to find some completion without imitation. The project which defined the way the practice worked, maybe more than anything else, was the project we did for the reconstruction of the Noise Museum, which took 12 years, was an important and sensitive task in the middle of what was formerly East Berlin. The photograph you can see here shows the building after the war. It's surrounded by other museums. The big building to the north of this is the Pergamon Museum. Just to the right is the National Gallery. And off the screen at the bottom is Carl Friedrich Schinkel's famous Alters Museum, the most famous of Schinkel's works and one of the most famous museums. This building stayed as a ruin for nearly 60 years. And we won the competition to remake it. The task of reconstruction can be a simple one or a complicated one. It's always going to be a bit complicated technically, but you can make it intellectually as simple or as complicated as you want. Simply, it would be a matter of copying what was lost. We have photographs, drawings. We could make a simulated copy, and it would appear very similar to what was lost. If you take that idea into the field of painting restoration or sculpture restoration, you would never repaint the Last Supper so that it looked new, because this would question the originality of what survived. You destroy what has survived in the attempt to recreate what has been lost. In architecture, however, we do often do exactly that. We destroy what has survived in an attempt to create an image of what the building used to look like. In that process, you regain appearance and you lose substance. And in that process, you lose meaning, because the meaningfulness of this ruin was that this survived, and this carries with it history. If you take that history away, you lose the significance of the building. This discussion, you can imagine, in Berlin was a difficult one to have, because the ruination of the building was not innocent. It wasn't a fire. It wasn't an earthquake. It was the consequence of German aggression and the results of the Nazi regime. Therefore, it carries many scars, not just physical scars, but emotional scars. It meant something, it means something to the German nation. Therefore, as architects, we had to deal with not only technical questions, how do we deal with the reconstruction problem, not only intellectual questions, how should it be done, not only programmatic questions, because we have to turn this into a fully functioning modern museum, but we also had to deal with emotional questions of social significance, historical significance. My friends in Germany were always apologizing to me that we had so much, let's call it debate. Debate in Berlin especially can be very robust. It can be very aggressive even. So we had more than debate. We had articles against the project. We had enormous amount of anxiety expressed from all different parts of society. This meant that we, as architects, we had to explain our ideas. It wasn't enough that we felt that we were right. We had to explain why we were right. We had the responsibility not just to act as professional, technically proficient people, but we also had to act in a larger societal way. The process itself also meant that the decision-making, the planning process, needed an extraordinary level of internal collaboration and participation. The decisions in each part of the building and to the whole building, as to what do we add, what do we keep, how do we do it, every decision had to be approved within a rather rigid German planning system. That meant that we needed not only to explain the project, as it were, to the outside, we had to explain it to the inside, to everybody involved in the project. Every decision had to be discussed. it had to be a totally participatory process, a project of total collaboration between every interested body in the city, from the historians to the urban planners, to the conservationists, and of course to the museum curators themselves. This put us in a unique situation where we were forced to have more collaboration and participation than might normally happen in a new building. And I will move on to this problem later. It's a premise. My premise is that we build too much without collaboration. We build too much without participation. We build too much without planning, without dialogue, without explanation. We need to find again a way of coherent planning, of social participation, professional collaborations. This project required us, this is just a sequence of slides to show you how we went from a stabilized ruin, making decisions. I mean, obviously these decisions were made through other methods, through drawings, through models, but then realized in reality how to go from this, how to keep everything which is there. The rule was we wouldn't remove any original material. And this is the final, where it's still a ruin. It never assumes to be complete, but it has found its own completeness. That requires continuous dialogue. It also, not only with the expectations of society, not only with the professional capabilities of restorers, not only with the expectations of the curators, but in a way also with the building itself. This was how the staircase was. This is how it was after the war. This was a protest document against the project while we were in planning. Very simply and very dangerously in a way. Do you prefer the top one, the beautiful 19th century building, or the ugly concrete Chipperfield? It's clear. I mean, you want the top one. So would I. I had to explain to everybody the top one's not available anymore. The picture we can have, but the reality is gone. And that, in this protest, was something quite difficult to explain. Why not? Why can't we? What's wrong with the picture? We're happy with it. We're happy with the image. Only you, as the architects, are worried about the realities. This goes back to something very important in architecture. What are we talking about? Image or substance? What a building might look like as a picture, or what it feels like as a reality. This shows you the expectation of the city. An 8-hour queue for the soft opening of the building. They literally queued for 7 to 8 hours around the building, and it was very well, luckily it was well received. So now it's become part of the city, and it's found, I believe, through this dialogue, through a process of real participation, real collaboration, a really critical process, a process of doubt, of evaluation, of articulation. It's found where it wants to be. Of course, I see hundreds of mistakes, things I would do differently, but I would say that the process was a good one. And this is something I wanted to emphasize to you. You can't get good design, you can't get good architecture without good process. We have become a culture obsessed with result and product and lazy about method and process. And as architects, designers, you must learn process more than anything else. Process means consideration, self-criticism, managing doubts, managing enthusiasms, following process, following an iterative and critical process of judging things, believing in things. We struggle in our society now that the planning frameworks which exist, not just in Galicia, everywhere, no longer give us safeguards in this process. In fact, our society has impatience about process. Our society wants results. They want image. They want things which can be easily sold. The question is, does that bring us to where we want to be? And in terms of us as architects, I believe that it devalues the really important things of architecture, which are embedded in the physical and experiential qualities, and also in terms of what this is for. I'm flicking through other projects. The Noise Museum and projects like this we've continued doing works. This is the Procuratia in Venice, which we've recently completed restoration. In this case, for an investment, a commercial company. It's much more difficult to persuade the commercial sector, as opposed to the cultural sector, to invest in these physical qualities. But this is the power of architecture, to work on to work with to always come back to what the architecture is for, what your solutions are aiming for. This is a project we did in Paris recently. It was the refiguration, the reuse of a 1950s building, and we wanted to make the building more public, so we created these new cloisters and created a new, made the building public, etc., etc. I'm concerned I'm running out of time. I'm flicking through recent projects. This is the restoration of Mies van der Rohe's National Gallery. Again, I would say, why would an architectural office spend 6 years, 7 years repairing the work of another architect? Well, first of all, it wasn't just another architect, Mies van der Rohe, and it's one of his great buildings. But also, I would say that, repeating myself about the Noise Museum, the interesting thing about restoration projects is that you have much more collaboration. You find that you are, as it were, safeguarding something which has meaning to lots of people. The building is 60 years old. Citizens of Berlin are fond of it, whether they're architects or not. And therefore, you are working not only with physical material, but you're also working with physical material which has meaning. And that's what architecture is meant to be about. It was a long and very difficult and technically, and again, I would say intellectually difficult, and a very responsible project, because our idea was to be invisible. The only way we would be visible if we made a mistake. So we only had the chance to lose, because our intention was that if we do it well, no one knows. They will only know we've done it if we don't do it well. So this required, and I'm not going to bore you, but it required an enormous number of technical and subjective decisions. In order to repair this building properly, we would have had to make quite significant changes to its architecture. And so this was a dialogue. So I'm going to try and just run through. I'm just showing you a range of projects which are public buildings that we've done. We've been very fortunate to work on a lot of museums. And in these projects, obviously, we're interested in the substance, the image, of course, but very much the space, the materiality, and the way the buildings will become public spaces. And of course, in the case of museum, you're very concerned about how do you make the experience of looking at paintings a richer one. That's to do with the proportion of rooms, the quality of the floors, the quality of the light, the sequence of rooms, etc., etc. This is Jumex in Mexico, and this is, I only want to show this because, again, I would say the simple question on this project was to make galleries. We made our lives more difficult by trying to make sure that the way the building sits within the city, the way the building is designed, promotes social activity, that it's not an isolated cultural box. Korea, similarly, we've created this headquarters building and tried to make the building as social as a headquarters building can be. I threw this in because this is just down the road in Santander. We're working on the old headquarters of Banco Santander to turn it into a museum. Returning to my central theme and, in a way, trying to introduce the work that we've been doing in RIA, I want to repeat this idea that as a profession, we have to think more about where we sit, what our relationship with our larger community is, and to some degree, what our relationship with each other is. What do we do as a profession? I would argue that the profession, the recent generations before you have been, let's say, competitive. In order for architects to be successful, they have to be identified. In order to identify yourself, you have to show yourself different to others, better to others. So my buildings are better than your buildings. This is not the best way to create a professional position. This is not the best thing for architecture, that we are all trying to show ourselves. And when I was the director of the Venice Biennale, I insisted that anybody that was going to show their work was not competitive. They had to show how their work shared common things with other professionals, how they worked with other professionals, or how they contributed into our common concerns. So I'm obviously trying to identify an anxiety about individualism and the fact that the last 50 years has been very much focused, and certainly in the Anglo-Saxon world, has been focused towards individual comfort, individual privilege, and probably most times at the cost of societal security and coherence. As architects, we have always been more interested, more concerned with the common than with the individual, and therefore we have to find again this relationship with the common, with the social, with the shared, in spite of the fact that society, in the biggest terms, has been moving away from that. However, we have to believe that there are enough reasons to hold on to this. And this is something why, we will talk in a minute about the foundation and why we believe that the work of the foundation is directed towards the common, towards the social. I was editing Domus 2 years ago. Again, I took this on as an opportunity, and one of the things that I did during my period in Domus was to engage with 10 architects and ask them what they felt was good practice. I chose different architects working in different ways. This is Joe Noeri, who's working in South Africa, who has been working in the townships. I wanted to expose architects who were not just building towers in Shanghai, but were working in societally focused projects which were, in my opinion, sending the right message. Joe was a great example of that. So I've sort of tried to establish my theme, which is that architecture obviously is a physical craft. It's about making things, it's about experience, but it's also about doing things and, in a way, making the world a better place. That's what we're trained to do. I left school, architecture school, told and rather convinced that we would go out of the school and contribute to making the world a better place. I wasn't really prepared for the fact that the world thought that architects were not to be trusted, that we've lost our trust. So how do we find that trust back? How does the next generation find that trust back? We have been working, so apart from because of the, let's say, privilege I have individually with my other offices, and because as a family we've spent 30 years coming to Galicia, we took the opportunity to think about how we might address common concerns. And common concerns are those things which are less and less articulated because no one is really responsible for them. Our world is shaped by individual actions and increasingly not shaped by collective actions. I don't need to tell you how extraordinary Galicia is. I don't need to tell you how the the treasure of Galicia is its physical qualities, its coastline, its mountains, its forests, its productive landscape. This is not just a treasure from the past, it's its future, it's its capital. I also don't have to tell you that over the years, and maybe coincidentally over the 50 years, the quality of this extraordinary land has been eroded. And that we have, through bad planning, through bad individual actions, and perhaps through bad, or through a lack of collective actions. And by the way, this is not unique to Galicia. We can say the same in everywhere. I showed you the slide of London. I mean, this is happening everywhere. You could argue that it's more evident in Galicia. It's more evident when you see a very beautiful little town and you see, where is this? Riancho? No, this is Tarragona.
No, I think this is maybe Villa Garcia. Yeah.
Villa Garcia, okay. Yeah, it could be any of the others. The public space is now full of cars. The traffic has destroyed it. So when we began looking at these urban problems, we were asked, can't you help us do something about our terrible architecture? After a year, we thought, it's not the architecture only. One bad house doesn't destroy a village. The problem is the square has become a car park. The street is now a traffic street. There are many reasons why the identity and the quality of the environment has been compromised. Traffic is one. Building on green land with lack of planning coherence. We discovered in Ribeira 37%, 37% empty buildings. So how can you make an urban, how can you make the urban better if the buildings are? And this is not a question for the architects. It's not even a question for the mayor, really. What does the mayor do? It becomes something, it's a bigger idea about priorities and values. We also, you can see here the issues of industrialization. The polygono, this is the polygono of Ribeira, built with the most wonderful views over the natural park that Manuel Rodríguez protected, and through his initiative many years ago did something so important. It's difficult because it makes a lot of sense to be there. It's right next to the roundabout, it's next to the Via Rapida, it's a very logical place for it to be. We can also see the industrialization of the port areas. Again, it made a lot of sense to expand the territory of the port areas. But in that process, we know that so often the identity of the towns has been lost because the industrial platforms have separated the village from the water. So we have, and by the way, this is the first piece of construction the foundation has done after 6 years' work. We have made a curved stone wall. The team is so excited because it's the first time we've ever built anything. But that's not our project. Our project is not to build things. Our project is to help things get built and get built the right things. We know there are issues, the abandoned interior, the abandoned rural which are, you know, we can find this everywhere. We have as a foundation tried to not identify these things as with blame, because again, it's not a Galician problem, it's a universal problem. And the problem is, in my opinion, lack of planning and lack of resources, lack of participation, and the lack of joining issues together. How do we consider projects from every point of view? And it's really difficult because everybody has a different opinion. It's not easy to do that. We believe that by slowing traffic in Palmeira to 30 kilometers, which we believe is the right thing to do, it will make the street become much more friendly, that everybody would be happy, because old people can't cross the street. But the funny thing is, the old people who are driving cars are cross, because when they're driving a car, they're a different person when they're crossing the road. So you have to talk to everybody and discuss, why do you want to slow the traffic? Why do you want to get rid of parking? Why do you want to do it? This is not an easy process, for good reasons. So we have tried, and we're trying, and we will continue to try. And Manuel will talk a little bit about that. I'm going to stop now. To try to invent a different type of architectural practice, a practice that's not commissioned, but in a way is working for the clients which I was telling you about. Not the client that pays our bill, because no one pays our bills very well. Of course, we do get support from various ministries, and that's been, without that we couldn't survive. But the clients we're working for are not the ones who are building buildings, but the ones who are living in towns, the ones who are passing the town in their car or taking their children to the school. So we have tried to create a different way of practice. Of course, it's artificial because it's only because of the slightly privileged position we have to use this, but we'd like it to become at least an example of engagement, societal engagement. And it's something that I've done also in Switzerland and London. We're very interested in establishing ways of working, but all of them point towards similar problems. It doesn't matter whether it's Switzerland or Galicia. The fundamental problem is an erosion of planning. And because of global warming, because of sustainability, because of these things, we are going to have to plan. You cannot have a circular economy that isn't planned. Everything now has to be linked, and we're going to have to re-energize planning process. Now this, before I pass to Manuel, who's going to take over the discussion of the foundation, these are the 5 points which I think are not conclusions, but they're observations which come from our experience. Lack of planning resources. Governments and administrations underestimate the resource that's required for planning. That's the same in England, it's the same in the centre of London. We have to improve planning. And I think also I would look at the next generation to think that, don't think about architecture only as designing shiny new buildings. You know, sometimes planning can be just as important. Stopping something happening sometimes is just as important as making something happen. Stopping something being built in the wrong place is better. As architects, we become very competitive, and we live on the idea that we must build something, because it's good for our career. It's not, your generation's got to learn a different set of rules. Galicia, connected to this, Galicia needs, I think, a territorial plan. We need to have a planning system that now includes, in a much more robust way, not just roads and development opportunities, but it has to include nature. It has to include the protection of water, of rivers, of our resources. If we're going to protect resources and biodiversity, then it has to be a territorial plan. Rivers run through different parts of the region, so there has to be an overall view. This third one is controversial. It will be a bit, I'm treading on toes, but again, I would say this in every country I've worked in, except Switzerland, that the profession must be protected. We can't just be, our fees can't be set by extreme market requirements. We have to regain a professional position. You can't do work without fees. We can't have such low fees. I mean, this is not a plea for higher fees. It's an idea that we, as a profession, have to have a status. And by the way, we have to be part of earning that status. So we have to regain a professional position, and amongst ourselves, professional coherence. The fourth one, I think, is totally fundamental, which is procurement. How are works given out? As a foundation, we don't do competitions, but to be honest, doing competitions in Galicia is a nightmare, a total nightmare, because it's an auction. The protection isn't there. I'm sorry, I have to say it. As a foreigner, I have to say it. It's really, really difficult. Now, I can say that also. I can repeat that in England, and I can repeat it. I would say the Germanic cultures still have the remnants of a very professional competition process. And I'm not talking now about the glamorous projects. I'm talking about small projects. Young architects need to learn their practice by winning a small competition for a little extension to a school or a little housing project. That's where you need to learn from. At the moment, this idea of procurement or competition is not protected. What we have done recently, and maybe you'll talk about that, in Vigo, instead of entering a competition, we volunteered that we would help them design the competition. And we're more interested now in trying to develop an architectural culture through competition process than winning them ourselves, let's say. So how projects are commissioned, how they are protected and realized is fundamental to architectural quality, because we have to, as a profession, we have to demonstrate good results. If there are no good results, then society doesn't value us anymore. It's in our interest to do that. And so finally, the last bit, I would say, looking at the professors here, I also think that we have to train you guys in a more appropriate way. We have to prepare you for a different type of professional practice than we've been training for in the past. Our training, my training, was very much preparing us to be a certain type of architect. And I think we're going to have to think slightly differently about that. I think this school should become really a great school of architecture focused on Galicia. And Galicia should be focused on quality of life, quality of place, environment, sustainability. This is a great chance in Galicia, because there is no other reason for architecture than to secure quality of place. And quality of place is a fundamental part of our quality of life. As architects, we are part of that. We can be part of that. But we will give just as much quality of life by making a nice square as we will by making a villa for someone. We may not make as much money, but it's more important. So this is a sort of shift to you. And Manuel, who has, with the team, I think some of the team are here, been working for many years trying to develop our sort of live laboratory. Thank you. Want to sit here?
Bueno, pois moitas gracias a todos por vir aquí. É difícil continuar a conferencia despois de Chipperfield, pero bueno, eu son Manuel Rodríguez, son director da Fundación RIA, teño a honra e o placer de servir este proxecto xa desde hai 7 anos, cando se me deu a oportunidade de comezar unha iniciativa que tiña que buscar iso, tratar a protección medioambiental, a protección cultural, pero tamén o desenvolvemento sostible basado neses valores de Galicia, non? Ao longo destes anos pois fomos construindo pois unha maneira de facer, unha serie de colaboracións, pero tamén quero resaltar que me acompaña pois un equipo que entre todos nós ningún supera os 35 anos. Deusenos esa responsabilidade aos 26 anos cando comecei eu nesta iniciativa e fomos todos crecendo con ela. Temos aquí unha pequena definición do que é a Fundación RIA, que tenta tratar de contribuir a... Bueno, primeiro de todo vou separar unha pequena introducción da Fundación RIA, un pouco como traballa, e por outra banda explicar este proxecto un pouco difuso que é o que nós lle chamamos dunha maneira xenérica Cara, unha axenda territorial de Galicia, e que tuvo unha etapa nestes últimos meses a través dun convenio de colaboración coa Xunta de Galicia e o Colexio de Arquitectos na que profundizamos neste obxectivo, non? Por un lado, bueno, Fundación RIA contribúe a análise, a reflexión, planificación territorial estratégica de Galicia con este obxectivo de preservar os seus valores. E por outro lado, intentar conectar pois estes debates globais con lugares específicos, con situacións concretas a través de proxectos piloto, establecendo estes vínculos que creemos que o noso maior valor como fundación, servir de algún xeito de medium para conectar tanto administracións públicas, axentes privados, sociais, etc., non? Para executar proxectos que persigan estes obxectivos pouco representados polas ambicións das axendas 2030, non? A nosa metodoloxía intentamos facela un pouco sempre do mesmo modo, non? Pero é primeiro achegarnos ao lugar coñecendo esa realidade a través dun mapeo, a través dos seus axentes, intentar extraer dali un análise que nos permita xerar estrategias integrais que conectan diferentes áreas dos proxectos, non? E que non só se limiten a aquilo que se nos mandou, senón intentar conectar pois esas cuestións que David apuntaba anteriormente. Facémolo impulsando esa participación real e que nos é útil para crear o proxecto, non? Sexa implicando pois axentes organizados, asociacións, entidades, etc., ou tamén a través do traballo de campo, que non é só esa recollida de datos puntuais, senón tamén establecer esos vínculos coa xente do lugar, non? Despois tamén o que chamamos orquestación das xentes, que un pouco intentar servir para ter eses obxectivos común, non? Ter ese marco de traballo común no que nesta foto, por exemplo, da dereita, 4 alcaldes de 4 partidos políticos se unen, digamos, en torno a un proxecto de mobilidade territorial para o Barbanza. Tamén apostamos por esta difusión dos contidos a través de publicacións en diferentes idiomas, a través de exposicións nas que abrimos ese traballo á cidadanía, a través incluso de conferencias, pois como poden ser estas, pero moitas outras que foron nestes anos, non? Estas líneas de traballo, pois, nos podemos resumir hoxe en día en 3 áreas, non? A planificación territorial e a identidade local, intentando salvagardar esos valores que en moitas ocasións se perderon ou están degradados a través de proxectos, por exemplo, o das intervencións no núcleo de Palmeira, pero tamén en outros núcleos ao longo do Barbanza, combinando estas estrategias incluso con esta estrategia de mobilidade sostible para a rexión, e que finalmente, digamos que intentaría mellorar esta imaxe do lugar, non? Ou, como falábamos anteriormente, estas implantación de infraestructuras logísticas, como son os portos, que erosionaron esa relación co mar, e a través dunha estrategia que intentamos transmitir, pois, a xente do lugar e aos axentes implicados, poder avanzar nesa recuperación das cualidades do lugar, non? Por outra banda, temos esta línea de xestión sostible do territorio, na que o maior representante este laboratorio ecosocial do Barbanza, un proxecto que facemos en colaboración coa Universidade de Santiago, a través do grupo Istagre, está aquí Lourenzo, que representa e coordina este grupo de investigación, que nos serviu moito para entender realmente en que territorio estamos traballando, non? Cal é o papel da parroquia, a comunidade territorial básica, cal é o papel das comunidades locales nesa conformación do territorio, e inda que pareza algo que é totalmente alleo á arquitectura, estas iniciativas productivas que son realmente as que dan forma a non só un territorio, senón unha cultura, un modo de vida, un modo de implantarse no territorio, e que os arquitectos debemos ter en conta e fomentar, non? Temos un proxecto máis mixto, non? Que bebe destas dúas líneas, que estamos participando a través das aldeas modelo como medio rural, pero que tamén intenta ensayar estrategias para a reactivación, para atacar a despoboación destes lugares, sobre todo centrándose nun primeiro lugar na reactivación productiva desas terras que rodean a vila, non? E que xa, pois, en pequenos proxectos xa se van mostrando maneiras de facer para recuperar os valores do lugar. E por último, esa terceira vía, que é un pouco da cultura da arquitectura e do deseño, que é o que apuntaba David anteriormente, de fomentar procesos creativos para todas as escalas, e que neste caso, pois, este proxecto do Instituto de Investigacións Mariñas do CSIC en Vigo deu-nos a confianza para poder desenvolver un proxecto de planificación, de deseño dun proceso, dun concurso que elevase, digamos, as cualidades das propostas presentadas a través de simplemente axudar ao cliente a saber que é o proxecto que ten que demandar, non? Sempre dicía un profesor de Barcelona, que foi meu profesor, cando faz unha boa pregunta, as respostas poden ser boas, se a pregunta é incorrecta, as respostas normalmente son incorrectas. E finalmente, un pouco onde queremos condensar un pouco todas estas líneas de traballo, onde queremos condensar esa metodoloxía aplicada, pero tamén servir como ese punto de encontro con institucións, especialmente coa Escola de Arquitectura, pero tamén con outras sociais, académicas, empresariais, en Casa RIA, que é un proxecto, pois, que esperamos que a partir do verán este en marcha, que un equipamento sociocultural, un lugar aberto de encontro con lugares de exposición, de debate e de traballo, pero tamén con aloxamento para ter estancias de estudiantes, de investigadores, etc., que se sitúa neste punto entre o mercado de abastos e o Parque de Belvís en Santiago de Compostela. Na segunda parte do traballo, quería explicar ese proceso no que estuvemos traballando nos últimos meses especialmente, pero que xa se remonta un pouco a súa concepción desde 2020, non? A pandemia provocou xa que estuvéramos pensando nun proceso de planificación conxunta que intentase fixar uns criterios comuns de traballo para guiar a acción de Galicia na próxima década, que acollera as axendas internacionais, as aplicase no contexto territorial de Galicia e social de Galicia, e que fixara aqueles os que eran aqueles valores, os principios, os obxectivos, pero sobre todo como debíamos de implementar as accións para alcanzar esos obxectivos, non? En 2022, o ano pasado, establecimos un acordo coa Consellería de Medio Ambiente, de Facenda, o Colexio Oficial de Arquitectos, que nos permitiu iniciar este proceso ao que lle chamamos dunha maneira ampla cara a unha axenda territorial de Galicia, que non deixa de ser un proceso de reflexión, debate, conxunto, no que diferentes disciplinas intentamos aportar a este debate para establecer cales son esos puntos en común que nos deberen de guiar. Fixémolo a través de dúas líneas, unha que foi máis dirixida a unha investigación propia e outra que foi aberta a un coñecemento externo, a un grupo de expertos designados, de 17 expertos, que participaron en mesas redondas elaborando informes de recomendacións. Por ir un pouco por cada unha destas fases, na identificación de temas, o que se fixo internamente co equipo da Fundación foi analizar esos documentos de referencia desos obxectivos de desenvolvemento sostible, as axendas urbanas, para establecer, para identificar aquelas temáticas que máis recurrentes eran e que podían guiar na súa adaptación ao contexto galego a acción desta axenda ou desta maneira de facer, non? Analizando todas podemos chegar a unhas certas conclusións que veñen de que esa diversidade temática, moitas veces común, centradas no cambio climático e igualdade, trátase tamén dunha maneiras moi superficiais, sen chegar, digamos, a unha precisión que despois fan difícil a súa aplicación, non? Casi entendimos que a través deste análisis que debe de estar no como, de que modelos, que pilotos son necesarios poñer en e que nos permitan así ensayar maneiras de facer para alcanzar esos obxectivos fixados, non? Mais que en traballar tanto cales son os temas e os obxectivos que hai que abordar. Na identificación das xentes plantexábamos quen estaba traballando no territorio, quen tiña esa influencia e que estruturas administrativas existían que nos permitiran abordar estas accións, esos obxectivos, ese reparto de competencial para ter un maior impacto e para poder alcanzar esos obxectivos dunha maneira máis precisa, non? E encontramos, despois de analizar un montón de estruturas administrativas, que habería algunhas que poderían adaptar o seu papel no territorio para asumir unhas competencias ou máis fortalecidas ou máis amplas para poder abordar cuestións que teñen un alcance moito máis territorial, non? Poden ser as deputacións, dándolles un sentido, as deputacións quizás máis específico, non? Que é esa labor de coordinación con concellos ou as mancomunidades adoptando estes encaixes territoriais, incluso os espazos de participación local como son os concellos, non? Analizar os instrumentos a través de reunións con toda unha serie con 11 administracións implicadas que a través destas entrevistas, destes traballos con conversas con eles, nos aportaban aqueles instrumentos que eles estaban poñendo en marcha e que seguían estes camiños que nos queríamos explorar, non? No seu análise, na análise destes documentos, constatamos ese carácter sectorial hiperfragmentado da administración que solamente traballa na súa parcela e que moi poucas veces cruza a parcela do lado e se miran conxuntamente. E, por tanto, incluso podíamos chegar a decir que existían instrumentos recollidos na legislación, como poden ser estes, os plans de ordenación de recursos forestais ou os plans de ordenación do espazo marítimo, que están sen desenvolver ningún deles, incluso vendo o interese económico, social, ambiental que teñen hoxe en día, cando as negociacións están en Europa e a eólica mariña chega e a eólica terrestre tamén chega. Existen un montón de cuestións que abordan estas cuestións territoriais, e os recursos forestais ou os recursos mariños son algo que merece a pena ser traballado en detalle, non? Quizás a reflexión máis xeral era que non parecía que se necesitasen deseñar moitos instrumentos novos, senón que os que estaban xa parecía poder abordar todos estes retos. Incluso nesta labor de análise de instrumentos, inventámonos, coa axuda dos expertos que compoñían o comité de expertos, unha metodoloxía, un cuestionario para avaliar aqueles instrumentos que estaban en marcha e que nos permitían pois ver a través desas categorías pois se o instrumento era capaz de, digamos, de responder realmente a esos obxectivos que se lles pedían, non? Incluso, bueno, constatábase tamén con moitas das reflexións do comité experto que era necesario dotar de medios suficientes aqueles documentos ou instrumentos que se propoñían, non? Había moitos instrumentos que nas palabras estaban perfectos, pero na aplicación carecían de moitos medios para convertirse nunha realidade. Olvidei presentar un pequeno vídeo que quería mosarvos, que simplemente resume un pouco o carácter deste proxecto. Nace dunha convicción. Galicia pode situarse como referente europeo de sostibilidade no horizonte 2020.
Lo que tenemos delante es la oportunidad de construir modelos, pero para construir modelos hay que recuperar la idea optimista de la planificación.
The aims of this process are real and will develop into actionable and adoptable recommendations, strategies and policies.
Tenemos que pensar en la generación, ya no de nuestros hijos, de nuestros nietos, y cómo nos reprocharán lo que no hagamos ahora.
Bueno, este é un pequeno tráiler máis explicativo, promocional do que o traballo que estamos levando a cabo. Non me queda moito, 5 minutos estamos. E, por outra banda, a segunda liña, non, que é a do comité experto que traballou connosco e que fai que este proxecto non sexa unha cousa individual da Fundación RIA ou de David Chipperfield, senón que ese proceso aberto á participación e que, bueno, neste momento designamos ese grupo de expertos de diferentes categorías, digamos, especialidades, desde arquitectura ou planeamento, ou políticas agrarias, pesqueiras, enerxéticas, forestais, territoriais, historia, socioloxía, ámbitos xurídicos do planeamento estratégico, do ámbito forestal ou da vivenda e da arquitectura en xeral, non? Ademais, estes integrantes combináronse con outra xente que viña da sociedade, de colectivos profesionais ou das administracións, que nos aportaron pois unha visión tamén máis cercana á realidade. Digamos que se foi coordinando a súa actuación a través de mesas redondas e, ademais, tamén a través da elaboración de informes de recomendacións que intentamos sintetizar, ademais da súa longitude, pero, bueno, intentamos sintetizar nunha serie de puntos. Mais ou menos a súa traballo foi esquematizado desta maneira, a través de cada integrante elaboraba un informe no que nós puidamos destacar uns contidos, establecer uns puntos de consenso que son, que resumimos nestes 8, pero, bueno, falar dunha planificación estratégica que supere esas visións sectoriais, ou un modelo territorial que teña en conta o continuo urbano ou esa paisaxe productiva, ou unha ordenación dos recursos desta lógica da multifuncionalidade, da circularidade, protexendo a identidade local, rexenerando e rehabilitando, ou un modelo de gobernanza interadministrativa, multinivel, sistemas de tomas de decisións que se basen na información rigurosa, pero tamén no seguimento, no control e na corrección dos instrumentos, ou que papel ten que ter a administración pública proactivo nesa planificación da transición enerxética, dotando de recursos, incorporando a cidadanía ou incluso impulsando esa investigación e formación aplicada. E, bueno, con estas dúas líneas chegamos pois unhas conclusións que tamén, bueno, estes apartados estarán publicados na página web, ou xa están neste momento, que podedes consultar desta maneira resumida, que serían un pouco este marco común para a toma de decisións que recolle pois estas reflexións dos grupos de expertos, pero tamén esos nosos plantamentos, unha naturaleza productiva circular como motor de desenvolvemento, ao que xa apuntaba David na súa intervención, ou ese construir o futuro sobre a rexeneración do existente, non? Que se falaba un dos expertos, un urbanismo cara dentro de rexeneración e non de consumo de máis solo. Por rematar un pouco como nos imaginamos este proceso continuando, partindo desa validación do proceso de ata ahora, un documento base que nos permita incorporar o coñecemento local dos diferentes sectores a través de mesas redondas e o coñecemento internacional a través de conferencias para chegar a unha síntese, non? E que nestas mesas redondas que idealmente se desenvolverán durante o próximo ano, pois involucrando as administracións públicas, academia, organizacións sectoriais, etc., para facer deste un proceso conxunto. Permitiredesme poñer o último vídeo que para rematar a intervención e con isto xa dou remate.
It is possible to do things without planning. It's just that without planning you don't know what the results might be, the unintended results might be.
Todos os procesos de ordenación territorial teñen evidentemente unha serie de condicionantes técnicos, pero son esencialmente aspectos de política pública, son aspectos do que a sociedade quere facer co lugar onde vive.
Non estamos a falar de planificación urbanística, sino de planificación integrada que recolla todos os outros aspectos sociales, ambientales.
Integrar ideas e pensamentos, integrar posicións e estrategias.
Desde a perspectiva forestal, desde a perspectiva agraria, desde a perspectiva gandeira, desde a perspectiva pesqueira.
Necesitamos ser algo más que consumidores de producto importado en esa transición energética y producir y crear.
Botando a mirada atrás, podemos ver aí moitas claves do futuro que ten que seguir este modelo territorial para Galicia.
Hai moitas cidades en Galicia que perderon a súa identidade de ser. Eu penso que recuperando esa identidade tamén se recupera a relación coa natureza.
El territorio non lo hace la administración solo.
Traballamos co medio ambiente, traballamos coa auga, traballamos cos sistemas, pero moitas veces nos olvidamos de traballar coas persoas.
Tamén habrá que implicar a la ciudadanía, que tiene mucho que decir.
Un proceso de participación non é un tema de comunicación, é un tema de compartir.
Se falamos de axenda, falamos de coxeneración, falamos de comunidades locais, de dinamización, de colaboración.
Que a xente entenda que é unha conversa, que é un proceso, e que o objetivo final é mellorar as posibilidades que vai ter Galicia no futuro. Non creo que hai ninguén en Galicia que este en contra deso.
Pois moitas gracias por escoitarnos.
Abrumador todo isto, abrumadora presencia, abrumador o discurso de David, abrumadora presentación da Fundación RIA. Axendado estaba un debate, pero eu penso que en este momento casi nos quedamos con todas estas ideas, as dixerimos pausadamente. What do you think, David?
I think they want lunch.
They want lunch. So there is only one question remaining. Please, David, should you come back to the architecture school of Coruña?
If you invite me.
Oh, you are invited right now. Okay, that is the only question available at these hours. Okay, any question? Not at all. Okay, it was great to have you here. It was great to hear from RIA. Maybe this is the very beginning of a long track. Have you heard about the common will? Lo que nos apela David. One question, short please, breve.
Máis que nada estaba dirixida a Fundación RIA esta pregunta, quería saber se estades xestionando algún programa de prácticas ou se estades abertos a este tipo de cousas.
Sí, sempre hai oportunidades.
No, I think there's a serious part to this question. That I'm hoping that you who are training now are not thinking that your only future is to work somewhere else. Your future should be to work here in Galicia. Your future should also, you should be aiming your professional ambitions with relevance to working here as well. And the school should be preparing you for this, because I think we're learning more and more that we are important as architects, but we have to focus ourselves more precisely and maybe more locally, but we have to find ourselves with relevance. And as students, don't just look at the magazines and imagine some exotic life, you know. Profoundly, the foundation, let me say one thing. What right do I have to say anything about Galicia? But maybe sometimes someone from outside has to elevate the impressions to people who sometimes don't know the value of what you have. I think you do know that deeply. But I also think globally we're learning that where we live, our community, the way we treat our environment is going to secure our future or not secure our future. And architects can play a really important role in that. And you, the next generation, you're the ones that are going to have to do that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.